Welcome to How to Live Slow, the podcast where we discuss slow living for the modern woman and help you design an intentionally slower family life. I'm Rachelle Glendon, your personal slow living coach and host of this podcast. I know all about busy, but I love living slow. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome to episode 86 of How to Live Slow. This is episode 2 in my series Mental Load May. Anyway, thanks for joining me. I hope you're really well. I really want to say thank you so much to everybody for the great feedback from the previous episode, which was the introduction to this series, Mental Load May. And also, I'm so excited to start chatting with some of you who have booked in for one of my 60-minute slow coaching sessions. There are still some places available if you're interested in that. The show notes of this episode will have the link that you can do that, or just go to my website, howtoliveslow.com, and you will be able to find it over there. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about doing inner work first and learning how to value yourself as a mother. This is a really important part. If you listen to the first episode, you'll know that that's kind of what I left off with was if you want to change things as regards to the mental load or anything in your life, you have to do the inner work first. You can't change things on the outside until you do the inner work and change on the inside. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you haven't listened to episode 1, have a think about going back and listening to it. It's actually called episode 85 on my podcast, but it was the one from previous to this. This is the second in this series. But basically what the mental load is, or what we kind of define it is, as all of that stuff that you've got, that running to-do list of everything you need to do to keep the household and the family running and getting everything kind of sorted out while maintaining your own life as well. You know, there's so much to it. It's really an in-depth kind of issue. And it is traditionally women's work or motherhood work. You know, there's so much to do, to think about, and we've always got this running list that kind of overwhelms us and takes over our brains so that we can't actually think or focus on other things all the time. Or we lose our train of thought. We walk into rooms and forget why we were in there because we've just got so much to do. And the whole purpose of this episode or this podcast series is to help you to unburden yourself from some of that and to work towards more equitable relationships and a more, dream family dynamic. Because as mothers, we start out on motherhood journey thinking that we know what it's going to be like and what we have our hopes and dreams of how it will be. But the reality of modern life often takes us very far away from that reality. So I want to share a story with you. I like to share stories just to kind of illustrate where I'm coming from and how I've done this work myself, and kind of to maybe hopefully show you that you aren't actually alone in how you feel about, sometimes feeling really overwhelmed by motherhood or resentful of all the things that you have to do before you get to be able to do the things that you want to do. Yeah, or, even you might even think about it as, and I know that I've definitely felt a little bit of resentment in the past in that I do all of the things and I feel so unappreciated. And then Dad walks in and he says, let's go kick a ball. And everyone loves that because Dad's the fun one. And I've realized that I actually want to be a fun mum too. I don't want to be stuck inside doing housework when the kids and Dad are out playing on the soccer field. I'd rather be out there watching along or playing along as well. Yeah, and so that's kind of where I'm coming from with all of this. So flashback to early 2020, and even though coronavirus wasn't a thing yet, things were sort of shifting. My husband and I had been together like over 8 years by that point. We had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we were coming up against some things. I'd started my podcast. We needed to work on how to kind of make things so that in our family life, so that I felt that, my husband's always been really supportive that I do the podcast or that I do any creative work that I want. Because as I shared in my previous episode, we have a family business, we have a trades-based business, and I've always worked within that business, even from before the kids were born and right through my maternity leave that I didn't actually have because, wages have to be paid regardless of whether you've got a newborn or not. And so I've worked at varying degrees on that side of the business throughout our years. And I guess we were kind of getting to a point where we were like, all right, well, what's going to be next? 2020 was when my son, the older one was going to school. He started school last year. So it was kind of like our last year before the kids were going to school. Before coronavirus, we had planned that we would go traveling for a year before my oldest one started school, and like we kept delaying it. We kept saying it wasn't quite the right time. I was getting really frustrated because I just felt a little bit like my life was on pause while my husband's career and my husband's business was going great guns. It was going really well. And in a lot of ways, that's great. And I'm really, really grateful for our business to be able to provide us with the life that we have. But there was getting to a tipping point where I just felt like, yeah, but what else is there? We were feeling it. And then coronavirus hit, or we call it COVID now. Do you remember the days when we used to call it coronavirus? COVID hit, and obviously all plans were on hold. Everything kind of was just like getting through, making sure we had a business on the other side of this pandemic. And we're really grateful to be, back at full steam ahead with the business. But again, this time we were like, all right, well, what do we do? What do we want as a family? But anyway, prior to COVID, we were at that position where we were thinking, all right, well, we were having some chats about what we actually wanted as a family. Were we going to be able to make a year overseas work and still maintain our business and all of that? So, and I was feeling a little bit lost, as you may relate. So I decided to go to therapy because I also had some other childhood wounding that I wanted to deal with that was also affecting my ability to, build, strengthen relationships. Like I was feeling a little bit, all of those things. So when I was younger, when I was 12, I went to live with my dad. So I was living with my mum and I went to live with my dad. And I used to describe this as being, my mum kicked me out of home, which sounds pretty dramatic. And I guess in one sense, it actually was what happened. But now that I'm a mother, I've got a bit more reflection time. My mother had some mental health challenges. She didn't have any structural support as a mother. She was a single mum and with 3 kids. And now that I know what I know about what it's like to be a mother, I actually have a lot more compassion for what her situation was. And so I don't actually describe it as her, air quotes, kicking me out of home. She was just doing what she needed to do because she wasn't coping. And that's completely, if you think about it in top level, fine, understood, but as the child experiencing that left me with a lot of, issues. And, now that I was in this safe space in my 30s to kind of deal with it, was all kind of bubbling up to the surface for me. And I really wanted to go to therapy and figure out exactly what was going on because I was, struggling with abandonment issues. I was misinterpreting a lot of things that were going on with my relationships, and I just wanted to get it. And so I started going to therapy, and I think I was probably 2 or 3 months in, and I sat down in my therapist's office and I said, all right, you've been seeing me now for a little while. What's your verdict? What's wrong with me? And I was dead serious. But she said to me, Rachelle, that's not how therapy works. I'm not here to figure out what's wrong with you. And I don't think that, if you think that there is something wrong with you, we can go through an, air quotes wrong with you. We can go through an assessment. But that's not what this whole thing is. That, figuring out if you've got some diagnosis is a whole separate thing. Therapy these days is actually just about figuring out how to help you to be the best that you can be and to support you to move towards your highest self. And she said, if you want my professional opinion, I don't actually think there's anything wrong with you though. If anything, you've just got really low self-esteem. And she said, if you learn to value who you are and what you do, things will change for you. And I don't know, for me, that just really blew me away. I guess I was kind of thinking, I've always had, maybe it's our society, but we always think, all right, well, what's wrong with me? What's the thing that I need to fix? For some people, it's their bodies. For some people, it's the way that they dress or their appearance. And for me, it was my brain. I always thought there was just something wrong. Am I depressed? Am I anxious? What's going on? And deep down, I knew that none of those were actually the case. I needed to learn how to use my brain better and how to not overthink and worry about things. And the realization that it was all to do with my self-esteem allowed me to then go away and work on that. And so that's what I did. I started to look at, well, do I actually value the work that I do? And these are my questions for you. All of that oversharing background story is to say it's so important for us to value what we do as mothers and to value ourselves, not just as mothers, but as people, as women. When you can do that, you become brave enough to face yourself and some of the things that you're doing that may not be for your highest good or for your family's benefit. And that's where martyr mothering kind of comes in. So my question is, how do you feel about the caring work that you do? what value do you place on the time that you take to take care of your children, to, clean your home, to do all of the things required behind the scenes that nobody really knows about, but just make family life work? The value behind making sure everyone gets to the dentist and the doctor, and making sure that the car is safe for the kids to ride in, making sure insurances and taxes and all the finances and the budgeting and all of that, if that's, whose responsibility is that? If that's for you and you manage all of that, well, how much value do you place on that? Because a lot of the mental load is invisible. A lot of the work that we do behind the scenes, it's not seen. So it can't be appreciated because it's not seen in one sense, if you think about it that way. So we have to appreciate it ourselves. We have to see the value. How much value do you place on the time that you take and the patience that you show when your toddler's having a meltdown, or your primary schooler doesn't understand their homework, or your teenager is having relationship issues with some friends at school? That is so valuable and so important. But, in our world, our capitalist world, there's no dollar value that you can put on listening, or there's no dollar value you can put on the patience it takes to get a 2-year-old to put their shoes on when they just don't want to. There's no value that we put on, making sure the kids have healthy meals, or if anything, it costs us. So yeah, I think the focus in our world is about freeing ourselves by getting to the end of our to-do list. And that's kind of like, finding the cheapest, the fastest, the most convenient, the most efficient, or the most productive way of doing something. And the truth about that, from a slow living perspective, is that that's not always the most satisfying. Like, doing something as fast as possible is never going to be as satisfying as doing it as well as possible. And I think valuing something means taking the time it deserves to do it well. So meaning that, I guess I've heard this term white space activities. And that's, I guess that illustrates, like, we assume that we can fit in washing and cooking and cleaning and putting on kids' shoes and getting them dressed and ready for the day. We fit that in around what we, air quotes, have to do, like the important stuff. So we make all of that extra stuff invisible and we fit it into the white space. But the problem with our modern lives is that there isn't much white space. So if we really valued the work that we do as mothers, we would give ourselves the time to be able to do it well. And, I think that's where we're kind of not going wrong, because it's definitely not anything to do with us as individuals. It's the way that our life is structured now. The way that society values us is by how much money we can earn or how much productive we can be at work. And that, again, isn't always the most satisfying. Now, I'm not saying that we can't get satisfaction out of work. We most certainly can. But I think that we don't value the other side of things as much. And like I said in the first episode, we are society. So if we start to value those small things that we do, the patience and the care and the attention that we take and the effort that we put in and the late nights that we do, all of that, the sleepless nights and all of that, if we really valued that, then that would give permission for other people to value their inputs, that work they're doing. And then that changes society in the way that society values motherhood in tangible ways. So that's just something to think about. And, recently I've started cooking a lot more from scratch. And I mean, it's beautiful that I've got the time to do that. And that's really great. Like, I've actually carved out that time intentionally, because I've really realized that there's something really satisfying and really nourishing about cooking from scratch. And the more often I take the time to prepare a nice meal and put a little bit of effort, instead of just doing steamed carrots, I might get some butter and mustard and marmalade and, mix it in together with the steamed carrots and make them taste like so good, so much better than just plain steamed carrots. And it's just hits your body differently. It just feels so much better. It just nourishes you. And that's self-care for me. And I really encourage you to find the ways that you can slow down and do things well and value them and take the time to do the things that are important to you, and give yourself the time, allow yourself to, because then you kind of create your own soft landing space, I think, because that is the problem, right? If we're so in this productive doing phase, it's really hard to take care of ourselves. And self-care is something that a lot of mothers really miss out on, and we really also don't value, because if we're not valuing the caring work of what we do to take care of our families, we're certainly not valuing the caring work that required to take care of ourselves. But it's only when you feel so valued, when you build your self-esteem to a point that you feel safe in your own body and you feel safe in your own home and you feel like you have somewhere soft and safe to land emotionally, that you can then face yourself and face the things that you're doing that potentially, air quotes, making a rod for your own back. I hate that term because it's not our fault in many ways, but we are in this society where patriarchal motherhood requires us to engage in something called maternal gatekeeping. Now, maternal gatekeeping is used against us. It's the idea that as mothers, kind of like a chicken and egg scenario. Maternal gatekeeping is where mothers engage in an activity and they think they're the only ones that can do it because no one can do it quite as well. And they might, as mothers, we might, interrupt when someone is helping because they're not doing it right. Or we might not be able to leave the kids alone with dad because we don't think that they're going to do a good enough job. So, we get this, and all of that, I guess, maternal gatekeeping is stopping us. It stops us releasing control and it stops us allowing other people to support us. And we get the blame for that because it turned against us in that we're some sort of control freaks and we think that we have to be the ones to do it. But the chicken and egg part comes from the fact that we live in a society that requires us to be so hypervigilant and so hyper aware and so on our guard, because who else is picking up the slack if it's not us? So yes, we need to learn how to trust our partners to look after the kids, but equally, they need to be aware of the social conditioning that says, we expect them to actually be looking at the kids when they're looking after them, not shoving them in front of the TV and playing on their phone or whatever it is. That's kind of whatever. You know what I mean there? Like, we expect them, if they're actually looking after the kids, to be looking after the kids to at least a certain level of effort. But when we don't trust that they're doing that, we can't actually step away and relax. So that's another level of where we get this overwhelm, exhaustion, burnout. We step into martyr mothering because it just feels like nobody is really appreciating what we're doing. No one is valuing what we're doing. But again, it has to come back to valuing that what you do is actually valuable. And then you can start to move, if you think of it as a line and maternal gatekeeping up one end, and somewhere in the middle, you can start to move towards the middle, towards a more equitable relationship. When you let go of that hardened kind of feeling that it has to be you, when you slowly move away from it. And that's where I said at the start on the first episode is that we're going to borrow from productivity and habits and procrastination, and we're going to borrow from self-healing and pattern breaking and cycle breaking, and we're going to borrow from slow living and minimalism. We're going to look at matrescence, and there's so many other little factors that slowly we kind of soften our edges and move towards more like, that, I guess you call it like being a lighthouse, where your family are drawn to you rather than you kind of following them around and chasing them like a mother duck and keeping them safe and in. They're drawn to you, they're magnetized to you, and they stay with you and they look to you for leadership rather than you chasing, kind of like, I guess this is like an analogy, like chasing them around, herding them back into the center, into the place where you want them to be. You can kind of be there and they'll stay with you, if that makes sense. I don't know. That's just kind of an analogy. It works in my brain. Painting a picture of, I'm just imagining like these little kids, baby ducks running around, whereas you're almost like, you don't want to be herding them around. You want to be staying in one spot and attracting them to you, keeping them with you just by them being invited to your energy in a way. But you can do that through working towards becoming self-led. Like, that self-leadership piece is so important. And that is by releasing yourself from the resentment, releasing yourself from the frustration and the overwhelm, and acknowledging that you can't do it all, but that doesn't mean what you do isn't valuable. Yeah, so if you've ever heard me talking about that martyr to matriarch mode, that's exactly what that is. It's like looking at how can you value your motherhood so that you don't feel resentful for what you do. So Your takeaway today is, last week we were looking at creating a not to do list. And a not to do list is just helping you to reduce your decisions. It's like doing less or pre-agreeing with yourself that there are certain things you just don't do and being okay with that. Now, to learn how to value yourself and how to value your motherhood, you really need to get clear on what your priorities and your values are. Like, what are the most important things? So if you know what you don't want to do, learning about what you do want to do is really, really key. Like, what is the most important thing for you? So I want to share with you a resource that I have. It's called Starting with Slow. So it's my slow guide called Starting with Slow, and it takes you through the process of figuring out kind of like what your values are. What are your highest priorities for this season of your life? Whether that's, the season of life with little kids or bigger kids or whatever. And to figure out what is the thing that you want to focus on most, and then allowing yourself to focus on only that for a period of time. And when you start to do that, you start to value what you do. You're not doing too many things, because when you do too many things, you're automatically telling yourself that what you're doing is invaluable because you're spreading yourself too thin. But when you know exactly what you want to do and what your values are, you value them, right? Because you're focusing only on those things and you're not spreading yourself too thin and doing things that are outside of your focus. So if you want to grab that resource, I'll leave the link. It's for Mental Load May, it's actually $29. It's normally $49, but I've put it down to $29 just for May, just so that you can access that may help you. Again, or you can hop on one of my 60-minute calls. They're $60. Also, my diary, the link to my calendar is down in the description in the show notes as well. So you can do that if you like, and I can help you to get clearer on what those values are and what you should be most focused on at the moment. And when you do that, and when you take really good care of yourself, when you put yourself first, you can then start to face yourself and start to face some of those patterns that you might be engaging in. May not actually be helping you, and they may not be serving you your highest good, and they may be taking you further away from the motherhood that you want to experience and from the life that you want and the family dynamic that you want. So I hope this episode has been helpful to you. I'm really excited to share that next week we are going to be talking about the right communication. So this is about how to host a family meeting, which sounds really boring, but it actually is really, really effective. And I've got a really specific way of doing that. The power of stepping into your self-leadership, into your matriarchy, and creating a family philosophy. So very, very exciting episode coming up. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it's found you in a moment of peace. Now, don't forget to breathe, mama, because you have totally got this. I will see you next week for another episode in Mental Load May. Thank you so much. Bye. That's it for another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to connect further, the show notes from today's episode, including all the social links and free resources, are over on my website, howtoliveslow.com/podcast. Have a beautiful week ahead, and I'll speak with you again soon.